Yeah, I mean, as far as writers go, um, I I felt like I had a pretty basic uh taste in writers like for instance, I read The Catcher in the Rye a whole bunch of times, you know, and I read, you know, I started reading the Beats like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg pretty much when I was like later in high school and into college. But I wouldn't say that I was like the most literary, guy because growing up I had a hard time reading because I got dyslexia. So everything I was very slow at reading, so I couldn't really just like devour books and stuff. But I remember it was like a big deal for me when I was in high school and I read like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I was like, what? I read a book that was a few hundred pages long, but I got better at reading. The more I read, I figured out ways to read faster and to understand things a little bit better. Well, before I started doing sideshow, the only book that I ever read was this book about freaks that was called We Who Are Not as Others. And it was I think it might have even been by Ward Hall from the World of Wonders sideshow, but it had a lot of the classic freaks in it, and I didn't know anything about freaks at the time, so it was you know mind expanding and eye opening for me. Um, but I read a lot about sideshow after I got into it. Like I read all the Shocked and Amazed magazines by James Taylor, and I read this really cool book called Freaks and Fire by a lady named J.D. Hill, and it's about the 1990s reinvention of the underground circus. Like talks about all the different characters from the Jim Rose circus and the Bindle Stiffs and um, all the circuses that were springing up, like the Know Nothings and the End of the World circus, like these punk rock circuses where people were just touring around, hopping trains, riding buses, riding, and getting from town to town however they could, um, doing bizarre stunts. So yeah, I read that. I read some stuff about Barnum and about the Ringling Brothers and some of the early circuses and how they would travel and stuff. And it's a sideshow encyclopedia too. That was really good. That was all about the different ages of sideshow. And yeah, so I got to read a lot as I advanced. I was like hungry for knowledge. I also read Memoirs of a Sword Swallower by Mannix. It's a really good book. It's about this journalist who accidentally runs away with the sideshow. He like shows up to a sideshow and he's gonna write about it. And this fire breather has an accident and burns his face up really bad, the human volcano. And then he's like all of a sudden helping with first aid, and then he's like talking to all the carnies and stuff, and he's like, they're like, oh, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna get another fire eater? And he's like, I'll do it. They're like, you know how to eat fire, son. And so it's like then he just like gets immersed into it and he starts like learning all the different stunts, and he learns about rigging games and fortune telling and mentalism and all kinds of stuff. He just kind of gets immersed into it. So it's a really good book. Yeah, Frank for sure is the one that introduced me to the Underground Literary Alliance. Um, and Frank, I I was just getting into sideshow at the time. It was probably like 2003 or 2004, And it was just the very beginning of the Carnivolution shows that we were doing, where we were trying to combine lots of different art forms into one show. So I was doing a lot of scouting. I was going on missions to modern dance shows and poetry readings and puppet performances. And funny enough, I did not meet Frank at a poetry reading. I met him at a puppet slam, where I brought my green puppet, who's covered in nipples and has like a penis and a vagina, and his name is Grandma Madudai. I brought Grandma Madudai to this puppet slam in Philadelphia, and Frank was like in this crazy Viking war paint, and he was, sweating like a lunatic and like pacing around and performing his poetry, just incredibly passionate, but also very chaotic. And at the time, I mean, that was where I was at with my art. I wanted just that kind of raw passion, and he really got a kick out of Grandma Madudai and the fact that I hammered a nail into my head, into my nose. He thought that was funny, and we got to be talking, and we just became like instant friends. And then we started hanging out all the time. And then he asked me to join him as a house painter, because I told him it was like in my family that my father and my uncle and so on and so on were house painters. And he's like, "Ah, it's in your blood. You should come and join me." And then I started painting with Frank, but he just like he taught me the ways, but he would like go off on these crazy rants as we were painting. And sometimes he would just get like carried away. And eventually he kind of passed me off to another crew, um which was great, because that crew ended up being like something I'm still part of today. And but I have to thank Frank for bringing me into the world of painting, um in West Philadelphia. That was awesome. I love his crazy rants, because sometimes they're not even crazy. Sometimes he's like the most sane person in the world, and he's just raging against, an insane society. But you know, well, Carnivolution is it's a concept where we had a band called the Hydrogen Jukebox, and the Hydrogen Jukebox was an eclectic band that had a lot of different styles of music inside of it. So we didn't really fit into a scene or a genre. Um, and so we wanted to make our own scene. And I had met circus performers and a fire breather, and I had the idea that we could be a variety show. And the idea was that Carnivolution would have people making live paintings. We would have projectionists, puppets, live dancers, poets, and circus sideshow. So there'd be fire, and there'd be all kinds of eye candy, but also like a deeper underlying message of a revolution or an evolution of consciousness through the carnival that we were making. So
So,
there was a political undertone in it, and especially in the beginning. Not as much now. It's more like subliminal. At first, um, they weren't quite stories. They were more like sketches, like sketch comedy. So there were situations rather than an overarching story. But somehow, I think that the story needed to happen, because the puppets started to get more personality, and we would sit around brainstorming, and it was a whole group effort. And we just decided that we were gonna take these that the puppets were gonna abduct us and take us to space, where we would have to fight all these cartoon villains like Mr. Commercial and Alpha Mouse McDonald and these kind of corporate um masterminds who were not really masterminds. They were more like buffoons, but they were supposed to be corporate, like evil geniuses, and we're fighting them and fighting them with the power of sideshow, using our stunts to do battles and that kind of stuff. It was, very much like a inspired by like an old Batman uh, TV show or something.
Hmm. Or the old serials.
Yeah, exactly. Because we always had like a cliffhanger. Because we did like a series where it was every month we had a show, and at the end of every show there was this like cliffhanger. You want to find out what happens, you have to come to the next show next month, second Friday, and that was great. We did that for a lot of years.
Was it difficult writing basically a new play every month for however many month the seasons were?
Sometimes it was difficult because we started getting really busy with our touring. Like we started going to more places and traveling more during the year. And so what we started doing was we would write an overarching story at the end of the winter before the season would start. So it would be easier for us. And then when we knew what the overarching story was, we could get together and have like a few sessions where we would record the voices of the puppets and write the script for that episode, and figure out who was in the cast and everything. So it had some flexibility to it. And not some of the voices um were done by the same person all the time, but some of the voices were like, oh, that person's not here, can you kind of do that voice, and then somebody else would do it, and that kind of stuff. Yeah,
That's cool.
it was fun, it was wild. Yeah.
And what made you want to take a portion of that story and make a film out of it?
um well, the film you're talking about, Satan's Playthings?
Hmm.
Or yeah, the Satan's Playthings was 2009's entire story arc. So, we were doing, and we have it on the computer. We just haven't edited them all together. We have every year to a certain point. But 2009, we thought that was like a breakthrough year for us, story wise. And it was just an exciting year in general because everybody was like 2 or 3 years into the sideshow, so we were like really excited. And not even more than that, but 2 or 3 years into like the Carnivolution. And so we had cool backdrops. Every month we painted a new backdrop, and we created the backdrops to be like almost like a backstage cave in this outdoor art museum. And the treehouse was the lighting was from the treehouse that was shining down into the stage, and the stage was just like a really cool like partly sheltered mural, and then people would sit on benches and sit on the gravel in the dirt and in the gravel, and watch the show. um but that story, like when we got picked up by uh this this group called Chemical Burn. We had done in 2007. We did a horror movie called Unholy Sideshow, Freak Show Apocalypse, and it was something. Frank was in that as Lazari, the dark magician, and I was Malerkus and Jelly Boy. And Frank was not just Lazari; he was also his clown character, the Masked Professor. So we were starting to do like in 2006, 2007, we were starting to do these characters and these stories, and we turned it into a horror movie. And because that horror movie got some attention, we got picked up by this uh what do you call them, a production company or a, distribution company called Chemical Burn, and they were interested in Carnivolution. And so, Matt is a filmmaker and he had all the equipment to edit stuff. And we had a couple of dedicated camera guys, and they were coming to all the shows. So we had a few different angles of everything. So we realized, oh, we could edit this into, you know, a really nice movie, but we'd have to edit it down and just like, because each show was like, you know, 2 hours long. So we edited it down to like the essence of the story and the best of the stunts, like, you know, maybe half an hour or 15, 20 minutes. I don't know, something like that. We did like that. And there was 6 months where there were all the cliffhangers and the full story. And they wanted to put that one out, but we ran into a little bit of trouble because of music. We didn't have the rights to all the music that we were using. So we had to take out a lot of the music that the acts were performed to and put in music that we had the rights to. So, some of it looks a little weird because it's like the act is being performed to a song that it's not necessarily originally performed to.
Hmm.
But at least you get to see some of the sketch comedy and the puppets. It's kind of like, in some cases it was a little bit like Meet the Feebles, which is kind of like a perverted version of the Muppets. And in some cases it was like Monty Python or like the Kids in the Hall or something like that, like a sketch comedy. Um, and then in other cases it was like a full-on sideshow with really hardcore stunts. We had uh, flesh suspension, where people hooks in their backs hanging from. We had a tree that was hanging over the treehouse, and we had rigged aerial performances from the tree. In fact, Frank Walsh even swung out on that tree from the treehouse, in a harness with fireworks strapped to his body over the audience. That was pretty crazy. Nobody got hurt though, thankfully. ULA was pretty radical, as you know. You were there, and everybody was passionate and like a little bit hot-headed, and wanted to make some waves. We did one unfriendly action, and the other actions were mostly friendly, actual poetry readings to friends and things. But I don't know if you remember. Um, you probably do, but we went down to this university when they
Columbia.
were. It was something to do with Allen Ginsberg and his poem Howl, and we were saying that the universities were trying to cage the beat poets and like put them in this sort of zoo and like take away their spirit and just you know tame them in the academic
Homogenize it. Yeah.
setting. And so for it was, I think they might have been releasing some kind of anthology. I don't even know what the actual, I don't remember what the actual situation was, but I do remember that, we kind of stormed the stage and did performance of some kind. And I remember like snapping a mouse trap on my tongue on the stage, and while they were giving their speeches, we were protesting outside, but then we like came inside to the event. But we also did some really cool thing in Ohio. It was like Jessica Disobedience was Edna Million at the time, and King Winkloss was there, Frank was there, you were there, and there was a band called like the Dad of Rock, and Not, it was my first time swallowing swords. Like I had just learned how to swallow swords. So I brought my sword swallowing to this event. And I remember it was just kind of like the beginning of the takeoff of my, career as Jelly Boy. Like I was, obviously I was in the underground. I was doing things in like the end of the 90s into the early 2000s, but 2006 when I learned how to swallow sword and we did these ULA events, it gave me the confidence to really take it further and further. And so shortly after that we started traveling a lot. I got the bug. I wanted to travel everywhere and perform everywhere. I guess I started writing it in 2004, which is crazy because like that's when it happened. And so, I didn't realize the significance of it, but I knew it was a significant moment that I had the idea of the Carnivolution and the Hydrogen Jukebox got to make a parade on South Street in Philadelphia. And we were working with this group called the Artists at Large. And eventually the Artists at Large kind of disbanded. And so the Hydrogen Jukebox got the contract to make these big shows and parades on South Street. So we had these, basically, we were making these big street festivals. And I knew that was significant because I had never been given that kind of money to make a festival. And it gave me the budget to hire all the cool, weird performers that I had been scouting out and actually bring the show into reality. Um, and of course, the show was a bit too radical, um, and made some waves after a while. And we had to, you know, get fired and lose that gig. But uh, we did find the Tiberino Museum right after that. So we pretty much went right from the South Street street festivals that had a budget from the head house, you know, to doing our own independent shows every second Friday at the Tiberino Museum. And that just gave us a lot of momentum because and then shortly after that, um, everything really took off. Like I learned sideshow, got some gigs at Six Flags Great Adventure, where I met this guy Albert Cadabra, who's a great sideshow magician, and he kind of brought me into New York City and gave me a job at Ripley's Believe It or Not in Times Square, where we were both doing sideshow outside to bring in the crowds and stuff. And it's like everything, one thing led to another. There was this huge chain reaction of stuff, but it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the enthusiasm and the excitement of the Carnivolution to steer the whole thing and make it all happen. But it did feel like it felt like some mystical stuff was at work. Like it almost like we were not completely in control. We were along for the ride and things were just happening and all these people started popping up and coming out of the woodwork and these connections started forming. And in my book I was writing about it as it felt like there was some kind of supernatural um interference, like as if there were these spirits of these kind of misfit ghosts that were behind the scenes, like helping us make our connections and helping us launch into this adventure. So, well, certain
One
ghosts
of
like
those
my brother
you
for
probably have.
one. Yep, Kathy Change, who was a performance artist in Philadelphia. They painted a mural of her at the Tiberino Museum, but she had you know uh killed herself by setting herself on fire as a performance art protest of, I think, the war in Iraq. And
Yeah, something
it
intense.
she did it on Penn campus. Like, uh, yeah, it was intense. And when I found out about her through Frank Walsh, I was like, wow, so there's this connection. And it's like, and then there was the Tiberino Museum, and it was like Ellen Tiberino was Joe Tiberino's wife, and she had passed away in the 90s, and they made the place into a museum for her in 99. And, so there's these artists that weren't alive, but I felt so connected to them, and I wanted to know their stories, and I wanted to tell their stories. And yeah, so they just became a part of it. Um, and so that's kind of why I started writing the book, because I felt like there was something profound happening, and I just didn't quite have the right words for it, but I knew that I would eventually. And so I started writing, and then that became a thing where I was writing on all my travels. If I was ever on a bus or a plane or something, I'd have my notebook and I'd be writing. I had the whole thing um, outlined, and then I would go into the outline, and I would just think about what had happened, and I would just kind of like do a little self hypnosis and really go back and try to recollect everything that happened in that moment that I was trying to write about. And yeah, that's how I did it. I wrote it all by hand, and then there was a couple of years of editing after I finally got it done. But I knew it had to get done because I had made an ending for it in 2012, like after I was burned in the house fire and I survived, and then we went on tour around the world. After that, after I got out of the hospital, we went to Europe and
Mhm.
India and Japan and then California and then back to Philadelphia. So it's like burn the fire, almost die, get rescued by the firefighters. Was thinking, fuck, I'm gonna die. Like I've never been to Asia. I've never done all these things, and then come out of a coma, and I realized, wow, all these people that I met and my travels had all been like rooting for me to get to survive, and I was unconscious, and they're all doing benefit shows for me and doing all this like crazy, mind work to get me to come back, because there was a chance that I wasn't going to come back. And I came back, and I was like, that's it. Let's do it full throttle. Let's go. And then I realized, well, that's pretty much the end of the book. Like I know there was a huge adventure that happened after that, but we started making documentaries about those adventures. And I was like, it seems like an origin story.
Mm.
It seems like, you don't want to hear about somebody's success necessarily. You don't want to just like read a book about how successful somebody is. You kind of want to read about the struggle. Like you want to read about like, well, what happened to this person that made them choose this life? And then what kind of struggles did they have to go through to get where they're going?